Hi everybody, today I would like to show you how to build high quality absorbers that perform much better than any foam panels ever will do. I will walk you through the complete build process that is really easy and can be done with just a couple hand tools. Plus they are really inexpensive to make, so you can save a lot of money and get great acoustics in your room. The absorbers I'm going to show you today are really easy to build. They basically consist of a solid wooden frame, light side panels to keep the shape, some fabric in the back, the filling, and the front fabric. And if you want, you can build an optional wooden frame for a more expensive look. Okay, let's start by building the main frame, which is basically the backbone of the absorber. That frame is simply 4 pieces of wood screwed together. Since we tried to make this build really inexpensive, I chose to use some roof battens for the frame. They cost €3.50 per piece, and with only 2 pieces you can build the complete frame. You can buy these roof battens in any hardware store, and when you buy them, make sure that they are pretty straight by sighting down the length of them. I will add all the dimensions of all the pieces we use in this build in the description below, and they can be changed if you decide to use different filler material, different wood, so you can adapt the whole dimensions to your needs. The roof battens I used here are 2 meters long, and I can get 1 long and 1 short piece of wood out of each batten. So we have next to zero waste, which is also a nice touch. The build of the frame is really easy. First you pre-drill the long pieces, and use a countersink so that the screws don't protrude the wood later. The screws I used were 5 mm in diameter, so I used a 4 mm drill to pre-drill all the holes. Also pre-drill the end grain of the short pieces that will receive the screws so that the wood doesn't split. Then at the end, just screw everything together and the frame is done. You can use simple hooks to hang the absorbers to the wall later, and let's pre-drill the holes for the hooks right now. It's easier now than later when the whole modules are built together. So these are our frames done. Now let's assemble the side walls. The material I used here is 3 mm MDF. That's really cheap, it's sturdy, and you can get it at any hardware store. The price for this material is around €5 per square meter, so I paid €4 for these couple pieces. Now we simply staple these side pieces to the frame, and to prevent the edges from being too wobbly, we use a little bit of tape to stabilize that edge. When using tape, check if the color will be seen through the fabric that you're using later to cover the modules. I used regular masking tape and it worked just fine. By the way, if you want to use other dimensions than the ones I put down in the description, make sure to take into account the thickness of the material you're using so that the edges meet properly. So this is the frames with the side walls ready. Now the next step is to add a fabric to the back of that frame to keep the filler material nice and tidy inside of the absorber later. What I used here is a gardening filter membrane that I bought at the hardware store. You can also use some kind of wheat membrane, which is really sturdy and very inexpensive. Now we only need to cut it to size and also staple it into the frame. This membrane cost me €6 at the hardware store. Now let's come to the core of our absorber. This is the filling material. I chose to use some wood fiber panels. They are sustainable, they are inexpensive, and most of all, they are really nice to work with. They are not as itchy and scratchy as the usual glass or mineral wool panels that are often used for absorbers. You don't need any gloves or dust masks to work with this material, but it's pretty hard to cut through, so I suggest that you build your absorbers exactly the size of the panels that you buy so you don't have to cut them. The sound absorption coefficient of these wood fiber panels is actually really great, and especially at this thickness of 20 centimeters, they work down up to 100 Hz, which is really amazing. And another plus is they are not so expensive. I paid €15 for one of these panels. Now, since we built our frame to the exact size of one of these panels, we can simply slip the filler material in. The next step is covering that whole construct with a fabric. You can basically use any fabric that fits your taste or budget, but I was thinking about what we could use to have a really low budget solution, is always available and has more or less the right size so that we don't have a lot of waste. And what I found was fleece blankets. You can get them in almost any color you want. They have a little bit of stretch, which makes them really nice to wrap around things. And yeah, they are really inexpensive. I paid €5 for this blanket. Now we simply stretch the fabric over our modules and staple them to the back into the wood. So up until now we spent €37.10 for one absorber, and it's basically ready to go. You can use it as it is. But if you want to make it look a little bit nicer, we can add a nice wooden frame. You can basically use any wood you want for the frame, but I was looking at a real low budget solution, so I bought the cheapest pine boards that the hardware store was selling. These were €11.90 for one. And since the pieces are 2 meters long, again, I get the short and the long board out of one board. So in total, we need 2 boards only for the complete frame. By the way, any hardware store will happily cut you all the wood and the materials to the size that you need. So if you don't have a table saw, you just ask at your hardware store. Now this decorative frame can be just screwed together as we did with the basic backbone frame, but I thought let's make it look a little bit nicer and hide the screws, and that's really easy to do. First we drill a hole that is slightly larger than the screw that we're using. In my case, I used an 8mm drill bit, and I drilled a hole to approximately half the thickness of our board. Then I pre-drilled the rest of the hole with a small diameter drill bit, and of course also pre-drilled the end grain of the receiving board. Then again we simply screw the boards together, add a drip of glue into the 8mm hole, then we put in a wooden dowel and cut it flush with the wood. You can buy these dowels for a couple cents also at any hardware store. I spent 50 cents for good quality wood screws, and now we have a total of €61.40. When the frame is assembled and you want to make it look a little bit nicer, you can chamfer the edges with a hand plane if you have one, or with a router if you have one. And if you have none of them, just take a piece of sandpaper and break the edges a little bit so that they are nice to touch. You can leave the wood natural, like here, or if you want a protective layer, you could use some linseed oil, for example, and just wipe it on, let it dry, and you have a protection on the wood. Let's also quickly discuss the width of the wood that we are using for this frame. You can either make it fit the absorbent material and the frame inside, but you could also make it larger so that you have an air gap at the back of the module. Having an air gap behind the absorbent material will increase the performance in the low end of this absorber. What you also can do is use, like in this case, 25cm wide boards and use a little bit thinner absorbent material inside if you want to save a couple bucks. Now, how long did it take to build that absorber? It took me less than 2 hours. And I was also filming the close-up shots, so it's really quick and really easy to do. And I think if you're going to make a batch of these, let's say 8, you can easily do them in one day. Now the only thing left to do is attach some hooks into your wall and hang your modules and enjoy a better sound in your room. That was the build of our absorbers. I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough. I hope I encouraged you to give it a shot yourself and build some high-quality absorbers for your studio. If you have any more questions or want to leave me a hello, I always enjoy reading your comments, and see you in the next video. Bye bye, take care.